Hello, and welcome to Mayor Brown's podcast series, Credibly Challenged. This podcast focuses on risk management issues for financial institutions of all sizes, particularly those in the banking sector. My name is Matt Bisanz, and I'm a partner in Mayor Brown's financial services regulatory and enforcement practice. Joining me today is Justyna Bolter. She's a senior counsel with the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. I've known her for a few years through the American Bar Association, and while she's not directly in risk management, I've been impressed by her background in risk and the ways that she's managed to intertwine risk and legal practice in a banking-focused career. That it's really an enviable accomplishment for someone who has only been on the legal side of things. But thank you, Justyna, for being on our program.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate the introduction and the warm welcome.
So I'd like to go back to the beginning of your career when you were originally at the Federal Reserve in a non-legal capacity. That it was more like the risk management that many of our listeners have. That what took you on that path before you became a lawyer?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people listening here have kind of careers in the risk management space. And what's interesting as I've met a lot of lawyers over time is that, many of us started out in non-legal roles. And I think that's kind of a common thread. And it really helps to make you a stronger lawyer when you have, potentially a related background or even an unrelated one in something else. So in my particular case, I came to the board in Washington, D.C. straight out of undergrad. I had a business bachelor's degree, and the Fed hired me into an analyst role in sort of like a financial statistics area that did a lot of like data analysis work. And at the time, I didn't have a full appreciation for really how much of a data-driven organization the Federal Reserve is, in that a lot of economics, I think in general, is focused on kind of collecting data and analyzing what's happened in the past and making predictions or recommendations on where policy decisions should go in the future. So I kind of had a front row seat to the types of data that the Fed collects from banks and even some non-banks, and what it does with that data. And some of it is a little bit of the more mundane side of things, really, like how it looks to make sure that the data it collects is accurate. When we look at kind of outliers in data and seeing how some of those outliers, they may be correct. It may just have been like a one-off month or so in terms of reporting a specific a number by a bank, but many times like that could just be a keystroke error by someone sitting behind the computer at a bank. And so our systems at the Fed kind of catch those types of things and go back and ask more questions. And so it's just interesting to kind of look at that data analysis and learn about how that works on the bank side and what banks are doing.
Yeah, I think it's like a misperception that people think of the Fed and just in general bank regulation as being driven by lawyers, when actually there's only a few lawyers at the board, and also even fewer lawyers out at the reserve banks. That I read some statistic that something like 80 or 90% of board staff is made up of the examiners and economists. And so that must be a transitioning over to the legal side, which is the high flying, gets all the headlines, but also is the teeny minority of Fed personnel. That must have been an interesting transition for you.
You're right. Like, I think people do think of the Fed as a legal institution, but it really is very, very economist heavy if you think of kind of who it employs. I always say that there's like two sides of the house, right? The Fed does like monetary policy, and then it does bank supervision. Those are sort of like its primary responsibilities. And the bank supervision piece, like you said, is mostly examiners, and there's also like a legal aspect there. Whereas the monetary policy side of the house, I mean, that's almost entirely economist driven. So really, you can kind of see how both sides like really don't have that many lawyers anywhere. Um, but we're sprinkled here and there. So yeah, I mean, when I started at the board, I actually started law school part time at the same time. So I was sort of, I mean, I was the if you want to call it the youngest, like one of the youngest employees at the Fed because I had just finished undergrad, and I was also one of the youngest, probably. Students in a part-time law program because most people had taken a couple years off before going to law school at night. And so it was, I was kind of thrown to the wolves on both ends. I was sort of unprepared for how demanding work would be, definitely unprepared for how demanding law school would be. But when it comes to risk, I was trying to manage all sorts of risk when making that decision, and probably I'm mostly trying to manage like financial risk in terms of paying my way through law school and trying to support myself through my job at the same time. So
Yeah. Well, after that interesting period of managing your risks in DC, it sounds like you took another different type of risk, and you moved to Chicago, and you also moved to work for the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. That's an interesting transition because I've heard from other people at reserve banks that life is quite different at reserve banks than it is at the DC headquarters. That someone once was telling me about the currency movement function at their reserve bank, and how, like, after a natural disaster, they have to coordinate the shipments of coinage and currency out, because the bureau, the Treasury Department's Bureau of Engraving and Printing, and the U.S. Mint doesn't actually deliver coins to the bank; they deliver it to the Federal Reserve banks, who then deliver it out to their members. And also, my law firm, Mayer Brown, for a number of years, I know we had some back office staff who were tenants in the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and there was always the joke about you having to negotiate our leases with us because we were leasing space from you. So how did you go from the board that has a pretty well-defined mission, the narrow monetary policy and supervisory, to being in a reserve bank where it's everything from handing out coins to keeping the electricity on in the building?
yeah, it's fascinating that you mentioned the cash and coin movements, right? Because that makes it sound like the Fed is much more similar to a commercial bank than sort of like a government agency, and that's very much true. Like the board in DC is sort of like the policy maker, the kind of the government center, and then the reserve banks are individual entities that are part of the same system, but in a lot of ways they do function a lot more like commercial banks. And so, yeah, I mean, for me, the impetus for the move to the Chicago Fed was really to change locations to Chicago, because I had little children at the time and needed some family support. But the job change was also fascinating. Like you said, I mean, there are only 7 lawyers at the Chicago Fed, and so you might imagine that like it's a large organization with a small number of legal staff, and you really wear a number of hats. And I kind of think of it as, again, there being like kind of 2 buckets of work. One of those being the everyday in-house lawyer type of things. Like you might deal with personnel issues, HR, employment. You might lease space in the building, like you mentioned. And then other things are very specific to it being really a part of the central banking system, which are things like supervising institutions in our district and managing the discount window functions and sort of, the Fed itself as a lender. And given my background, some lawyers come in working more on the in-house side because they've been in-house counsel at other banking institutions or just other companies in general. And given my background, kind of coming from the board and in the central banking function, I tend to do more work in the lending supervision area.
Yeah, I knew another lawyer who was at a different reserve bank, and I know before she had joined, she had only really practiced in HR and employment law areas, and it was a steep learning curve for her to get up to speed on all of those other parts of supervision, real estate, all of the other things that the reserve banks do. But even within things that you're familiar with, like when you talk about discount window lending, that there's all the different types of collateral that member banks can pledge, and assessing whether it is a permissible type of collateral or whether it's the right type of security interest, that can vary widely. So when you're confronted, even within an area that you're somewhat comfortable with one of those new types of situations, how do you manage that risk with such a small team that you're on?
Although we're a really small team, kind of at each individual reserve bank, we have sort of like a system-wide effort, a pool of knowledge to really leverage when it comes to those types of kind of nuanced or even like new, completely novel issues. And so we work system-wide on various matters frequently. So in addition to kind of working locally, we have a lot of colleagues spread across the country that we can who may have experience in this area, who have practiced in this area before, who maybe had maybe they even worked at law firms in that kind of area. And this is also where my experience for a couple of years, I did work at a big law firm, and I worked on corporate and finance matters. I never thought that going back to the Fed would mean that I would be looking at like lending credit agreements again. And yet here we are. I guess at the time I never really appreciated that the Fed does work like a commercial bank sometimes, with, of course, various nuances and, like you said, specific collateral types that are probably more narrow than in many traditional lending spaces. But it's been fascinating to kind of see it all come full circle. Certainly, whatever you learn at a law firm will never be lost if you continue practicing law.
Well, good. Well, I should appreciate my colleagues this weekend who tutored me on the different early amortization sequences for paying off a securitization. Because when I first asked the question of, well, Matt, can we use this type or that type? And I was like, I'm going to need you to back up like 4 steps here because I don't even know what those words mean. I'm just a mere regulatory lawyer. I don't know commercial terms, and they taught me, but maybe someday I'll get to use it in the government space. You mentioned having some young children. When you made the move back to Chicago? I have one of my own, and thankfully the firm has been pretty supportive of family life. But how have you managed that kind of as another risk of it's kind of a double-sided risk of wanting to be engaged with your career, but also wanting to help your children grow up and also not burn out? Like, how do you manage that kind of risk in your life?
Yeah, honestly, like the move has been really great for our family generally, because I have family support here. My parents are local to Chicago, and having them nearby adds a whole nother layer of support when it comes to having someone available to pick up a sick kid from daycare, or anything that will come up as they kind of grow and transition to sports or other activities. It really helps both me and my husband like able to focus on our careers when we need to, and still make sure that the kids have uh, the attention that they need, and the space that they need to grow. So it's been a wonderful transition, and I'm so thankful to have them nearby, and also thankful for the Chicago Fed, because for when it comes to a place of employment, it really values work-life balance, and it's really understanding when it comes to taking time off and needing time off for various family commitments. And as we've all kind of gone through the pandemic, the ability to work from home has really made parenting a different experience. I have no idea how parents managed to go into the office 5 days a week just a couple years ago.
Yeah, it is something that I'm lucky enough. My kid's daycare is in the building next to the office, so I can go in 5 days a week only because his daycare is literally in the next building. I couldn't imagine like in the movies getting everyone out the door and then drop off and that kind of thing. That would be impossible. It sounds like it was good for you making the transition to the legal side, because I've heard on the supervision side that examiners spend a tremendous amount of time on the road,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if they're either assigned to a large portfolio of small banks or a big bank that's in a remote city. That wasn't, I assume that's something you weren't looking for when you moved back to Chicago.
Yeah, the examiner path is sort of like a bespoke animal. I think it used to take at least 5 years to be a commissioned examiner. So it really, like, once you commit, you have to commit for a specific amount of time before you can kind of even go out on exams. There are kind of pockets within the examiner space where I think there's less travel involved. So I think folks that want to kind of step down from the travel piece, there's places to go within the organization and still do exam work, but without the travel. And then, as we've all kind of merged towards doing things remotely, even in the examination space, they've been able to kind of work that out, and exams have become more hybrid. Certain portfolios are examined virtually, and you don't have to go on site as frequently, even in the bank exam space. But that's certainly a driver for a lot of people. When they're young, when they're just starting out, they might want to be examiners, and then over time they do tend to slowly kind of transition or find ways to reduce their travel because it's tough. And in the Midwest, in the Chicago district in particular, a lot of the banks are small community banks, and so from Chicago, they're usually probably driving, to be fair, like driving into Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa. It's not like flying to glamorous places, Vegas or Miami. You're really kind of on the ground at a commercial bank and in many rural areas.
Yeah. And I was having dinner with someone who was bemoaning that they had to go to a conference in Vegas and fly straight from there to a conference in Miami. And I was like, oh yes, that's such a terrible life that you're leading. Yeah. So
I mean, you may not be sleeping,
right,
but
exactly.
you are having fun, hopefully.
Yes, yes. So one part of this podcast that we like to do is think about some of the younger professionals out there on both the legal and risk management sides, because um, I think in business school and in college in general, there's not a huge push to get people into data analytics and risk management. And certainly in the legal side, there's not a huge push to get people into financial regulation. That at GW, I'm sure you had a huge segment of your class who wanted to be your traditional corporate lawyer, your traditional commercial litigator, and then there was probably another segment that was doing the Department of State or the presidential management fellows programs. And there weren't a ton of people queuing up to work at the Federal Reserve. Having made both of those transitions against the current, what advice would you have to younger professionals today?
Yeah, I find that if you kind of try just forge your own path, there could be less competition along the way, which might make it, more realistic or slightly easier to get a particular role. And the other piece of that is like demonstrated interest. So by working at the board while going to law school, I was able to demonstrate then when I came back to the board and wanted a legal job, I was able to demonstrate interest in the organization, in its mission, kind of already a basic understanding of what it does and why it's important and how it functions. And some of that that's not stuff that you really learn in a textbook. That's just those are things that you feel out once you start a job and talk to people and get to know people and move across different divisions. I don't even know how many divisions are at the board these days, but I mean, I worked in 3 of them. So just by nature of moving around, you kind of meet people and learn what they do. And it's really just a way to also like try out different things, because if I had tried that out and didn't like it, I could have kind of pivoted away probably after law school. So it was interesting for me, like risk is all about like not putting all your eggs in one basket and having a backup plan, and all those things. And so by kind of working and going to law school at the same time, I just thought, well, hey, if work doesn't work out or if I don't like what I'm doing, then once I finish law school, I can just go be a lawyer and do something different. And by the same token, right? Like if law school for some reason doesn't pan out or I don't get that dream job right out of law school, I still have a job, and that's okay. Like this is a job it's not just a placeholder. It's somewhere where you can truly build a career and move up the ranks. Like the law degree is just extra, if you will. Like you don't need it. I mean, you can't be a lawyer, but you can still work at the organization and do meaningful work and contribute in other meaningful ways. And so I always kind of laughed a little bit when anyone asked me, would you when are you going to quit your job and just go to law school full time? And I just always thought like, well, that's not really the end result. It's kind of like both paths were really important to me. And I was like, well, when am I going to quit law school and just keep working and kind of like try to find the next interesting project that I want to get on at work. And so that's kind of how I always felt, like both were really important to me. And luckily, I really did like my work at the Fed. And so that's why I ultimately found my way back to the organization. And I always thought I was Fed for life. So we'll see.
Yes.
No promises, but
you've already moved up to senior counsel, so that's a step in the right direction. Getting promoted to senior counsel. That's a pretty high level position when there's only 7 lawyers at the Chicago Fed. So congratulations on that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Justyna, I want to thank you for taking the time with us today to share those thoughts on how you've merged those different parts of the practice and into what is so far a fairly impressive career and also just a whole family work-life balance. It's also impressive. I realized that we've had a bunch of different personalities on Credibly Challenged, and this is again another unique perspective that I hope our listenership will appreciate. And to you, our listeners, I want to thank you as well for coming on the program or tuning into the program. Without you, we wouldn't have a reason to do these things. And so just like I'm thanking Justyna, I thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.
Thanks so much, Matt. Take care.